having a structured step-by-step thought process that you can actually apply in game is paramount to success in poker. In today's session, you're going to see live play followed by a quick review, and as I play live, I'm going to attempt to show you the carrot corner backed 3-step thought process, which goes as follows. Step 1, what do I think is the case here in theory, and what is my toolkit for the spot, meaning bet sizes and lines that I can take. Step 2, what will my hand do? Will it mix? Will it take a pure action? And step 3, will I deviate from that based on pool or player tendencies? Let's get into the session. Let's learn how to perform under pressure and how to stick to a solid step-by-step thought process in real time. Just showing you the structure today so that you guys can see that this is how we think all of the time. I'm going to play King 10 and then we're going to compare the thought process we had there to a sim and look at how that goes in theory as a starting point. King 10-9, I'm going to be playing small c-bet with range on this sort of triple Broadway board. That's my default game plan. If Philem was a recreational player, I would actually just size this up because high equity hands on messy boards where recreationals have a lot of stuff are just going to make for higher EV plays. On turn here, my toolkit is going to be a B60-ish sizing on this card or check. I'm going to be doing quite a lot of checking on this card in general. This hand, we're blocking calls. We're not very nutted. We don't actually have a high investment ceiling or capacity to get called by that much worse. I'm going to go with pure check here in theory, and exploitatively I see no reason to deviate here. Ace Jack, I'm going to take this 3-bet to get into a spot, but this is of course just very close and optional. Villain picks the sizing. I think there can be some value hands that we beat here, like Ace Jack, for example, things like that. Worst 2-pair, pretty easy call, not much to say, absolutely nowhere near raising this combo, and no deviation really possible. Better 2-pair makes a lot of sense for that sizing. Alright, so onto the analysis. When you're doing this kind of play and review session, your analysis is really to line check yourself to make sure that your thinking was correct and see where your in-game thought process was off so that you can recalibrate it for similar spots in future. Button is betting 1 big blind here with range. They were actually betting 88% of the time for the 1 big blind sizing in the default sim, so I just node locked this to always bet. Big blind calls and turn is state of diamonds. Big blind checks it over to button, and the solve was already using a very similar sizing to what I'm using here. I didn't alter this one 4.4. I said about B60. I'm using overbets on brickier turns than this, but on these very nut equalizing turns we want to be sizing down, which is why that was our toolkit that we mentioned in game. And with King 10 here, it's actually doing a lot more bet than I thought it would. The hand is better than I thought that it was, which is really interesting. And to see why it's betting a lot here, you can just look at the reaction. Although some King X with no redraw is folding, there's a lot of sort of pair plus draw hands just calling here, like Jack 9, and worse 2-pair obviously like 10-9, things like 9-8, 10-8, etc. I kind of ignored just how much King X with gutter, worse 2-pair was in villain's range here, and was maybe a little bit too blinded by the fact that I blocked some of the continuing range and by the 3 diamonds and 3 straight nature of this board. In real life then, I think bet's probably just better here. I think pool's going to do a really bad job of actually bluffing river if this goes check check, so checking back and then calling the bet like we did just isn't really the way to go, I don't think. And you can generalize this to just say make thinner value bets on turn, or err on the side of pure betting your thin value bet mixes on turn when you're against a passive pool, because you're not going to get rewarded as much in the branch where you check. On the turn here, when we checked our hand, I think we underrated it. I thought it was close to pure check, and I didn't actually do what I said I was going to do and think exploitatively enough. So if I'm, it was a bit later in the session, I'm playing a bit better there, I might, if the gears are oiled, I might actually start going, hold on, this is close. Bet tends to overperform with thin value when it's close on really wet boards because they get underbluffed on river, and hopefully I would have found that. But yeah, I kind of played my C game there at the start of the session, and don't actually like my check on turn. I think it's a small mistake. On the river, I'll give villain an array of different sizes. The B40 block-ish size that they used is one of the most prevalent, and you can see here that they are indeed meant to do that with stuff like ace queen, ace jack, even ace 7 offsuit. I forgot those hands existed, but yeah, just naked ace of diamonds hands that called flop. So definitely we have a value beater against that. I don't think we're going to have the requisite equity to raise. Yeah, it's just a pure call and only a pure call. So we were right about that one, but definitely we can go back to the turn there, look at that spot where we have a mix and this is where we really do want to implement what's called the soft exploit. A soft exploit is where the solver is mixing your combo, but you choose a pure action with it, and you can contrast that to a hard exploit. A hard exploit is where your combo is never taking an action that you choose to take 100% of the time. So when you see a mix here, very good indicator that you want to be thinking about pool's tendencies and how are they going to react to bet, how are they going to react to check. I think against bet, they're going to not really give you a hard time by raising. Against check, they're not really going to bluff enough. Against bet, they're probably going to call too often. They might even call top pair no redraw here, under reacting to the texture. They're meant to just pure fold here with king 4 of clubs or something like that. I don't know if that they're necessarily going to do that. So we missed a trick there. Really instructive. That's why we have sit in, sit out, play and review type sessions in our poker diet. I highly recommend doing this sometimes. Playing poker for the sake of learning and not just to get in volume. It's not all about cramming volume. This can be highly valuable stuff. Very quick announcement, guys. You know what I noticed this week and last week? Some people have been picking stuff up on carrotcorner.com, embarking on their poker education without using a discount code. We have this code EMBARK25 right now that'll save you 25% off. I always feel a little bit weird, almost guilty when people don't use a discount code, because let's face it, I throw them around left, right and center here on YouTube. So as a bonus for you watching this channel and being a loyal viewer, do use EMBARK25 to save hundreds of pounds or dollars or whatever your currency is on your poker education at carrotcorner.com. Top link in the description. Let's go on to the next hand here. Going to always 3-bet queens. I do think cold call and 3-bet are both fine against early position open in theory. And this is going to be big bet board for us. I'm going to go with B100 and I'm going to do it pure. This is my toolkit for this spot. Villain calls. I'm going to always bet my hand on turn here using the B50 toolkit in this spot. This is of course going to be a bet call, the good old chip, riffle and combo draw. Let's run it. Okay, this sim taught me a few things that I'd missed in game, so I'm very glad that this hand came up and that we looked at it. The first thing is that when the board is Jack 9 deuce, it's very different to it being a really low board, and on something like 7-3 deuce, where you've got giant overpair advantage, your queens is going to be value betting against jacks, 10s, 9s, 8s, just all of those worst pairs. The B100 is a really cool strategy. On this board, and especially in the slightly earlier position of hijack versus button, compared to say cutoff button, the opponent is going to have jacks and 9s at quite a high frequency, and not only are those sets that beat queens, but they're hands that can't be there as pairs now, right? So you can't value bet against pocket jacks or pocket 9s when those hands are sets. So Jack 9 deuce, I would recommend a bit of a smaller sizing, and actually with pocket queens, if you're using B100, you're doing a lot of checking with this hand. It's actually a lot thinner than I thought. It's more cuspy. Checking behind is reasonable. The hand's not like super vulnerable because it does block a lot of the draws that villain can actually have here, like queen 10 suited, king queen suited, etc. And yeah, you can do your value betting later. When you're playing a B100 strategy, you're doing a lot of checking, and you're betting kings more than queens because kings is just a thicker value bet than queens is in this spot. So we did go for B100 for better or for worse. Villain called, the turn is the 6 of diamonds, they checked, and then I mentioned in game that I'm playing B50 or check. The solver agreed with that. It had a similar sizing when I first loaded it up in this AI mode, so sizing is reasonable, and queens is now just a pure bet. There's an interesting thing going on with vulnerabilities here, where kings is your least vulnerable overpair because you're blocking a lot of the draws and outs of draws that villain can have here, and aces is actually a bit more vulnerable again. Queens is obviously more vulnerable to two different overcards. So always betting the hyper vulnerable, fairly thick value hand. Now we got a very favorable run out here. Queens is very glad to see this card, so just always wanting to put in the value bet there. And villain's play apparently is like slightly inaccurate to shove instead of calling here. To jam over this, it actually wants to have like the king queen of spades, king queen of diamonds. It wants a better redraw and blockers to the bet call value range of queens and kings, I guess. But yeah, an interesting hand, that one for sure. Definitely need to just be a bit more careful about texture before I embark on the B100 or check plan. Look for the low boards if you're going to build something like that in, guys. Jack 9 deuce in this configuration. It's not an amazing board for you. It's a lot dicier than it would be in some other spots of like late position, for example. All right, let's get back into the action here. We 3-bet ace king here, get called by the cutoff, and this is another one of these flops where we are playing a mix of B100 and check. I'm going to go ahead and check this time. When you're playing the bigger sizing, you're going to have a bit of a higher check frequency than normal. And raise and call are both okay here with this combo. Going to be going for call. This spot is typically not overstabbed by overall population, but if your opponent is more of a mass data reg that we talked about on a recent video, they could well be overstabbing the flop here. This player player has a relatively high VPIP, I think is multi-tabling. One thing you can actually do is check the lobby in these cases and just see how many tables your opponent is actually on. If they're 4-tabling with the higher VPIP, this player is 4-tabling, can be an indicator that they are playing that strategy. I'm going to go with pure call. I don't think my hand is a pure call in this spot. I think it's probably just completely indifferent, especially with having the ace of spades there. We don't block ace 10 suited. That said, I'm going to be calling. I think it's likely my opponent's over bluffing, and the reason for that is that they are a active looking 4-tabler who's betting flop and turn in a node that is very overfolded. I'll talk more about that in the review. All right, so cutoff versus big blind, 3-bet pot, 10-8-5. It's the kind of board you can go really big on. We were playing B100 check. Our hand with a diamond can go either way. It's worth pointing out that when you're going for the really big c-bet here, you have to be a bit more selective about your bluffs. You'll note that like King Queen of Hearts isn't really betting. Ace King without a diamond isn't betting. You want to reduce the amount of the time your opponent continues with your blockers when you're using a sizing like this on a board that's not that favorable. You can see EV wise here, we actually have a disadvantage. We have 8.08 chips in EV, whereas in position has 10.7, and that's why the bet frequency is overall quite low. We went for a check. Cutoff is supposed to be stabbing sometimes, and this is where player type is just so important. If you're against a nitty player, they're going to stab more often with hands like jacks, because nitty players have a scarcity sort of protect themselves mindset where they want to bet with their value hand that's vulnerable. They don't want their opponent to get there. They don't want to see a king on the turn, that kind of thing. And they're going to do a very bad job of bluffing with lower equity stuff, so you're not really going to see them bet with ace 4 of spades very often. So against a tight player, it's not really a great way to go to check call this flop, because you're just putting your money in against overall a stronger range. And against that sort of player, I'd rather just check raise, turn my hand into a bluff, maybe do some betting myself, just pick a different line really. Against someone who could well be an aggro reg, and there are plenty of them in 100 or 200 Russian cash pool these days, these players are playing more of a mass database strategy. They're trying to aggress in lines where they think the pool is overfolding. When I check here, I'm entering a line that the pool overfolds in my shoes. And I'm very conscious of that when I'm against a player that could be one of those aforementioned aggressive types. So when I face the B33 here, it could well be coming from a range that's much wider than this. Yes, I expect him to bet jacks all of the time and queens and things like that. It's really weird that this range has kings, and I don't think people slow play that pre-flop for the most part. But I do expect there to be more of these ace 10, king 10 jacks in the betting range than this. But I also think that they may just be mindlessly betting with all kinds of hands, and therefore it could still be overbluffed nevertheless. So we decide to check call. The main reason for check calling, I don't know if I said this when I was recording, is that I actually expect aggression throughout the rest of the hand to be probably a bit too much from that kind of player type as well. I am making a big assumption here. I didn't know the player type, right? I don't know for sure. It's just a 4-tabler that looks active. It's hard to say, but plenty of the 4-tabling regs are playing this style these days. So worth bearing in mind. So we call. The turn is the brickiest brick. It's one of these cards that if villain has been overstabbing the flop and they want to bluff the turn a lot, they're going to be severely over bluffing now. So we start with check. Their strategy on turn, okay, they can get kind of aggressive here. There is plenty of bluffing with just pair draw hands like king queen. Again, if you're playing a nitty player, they're just not going to find that. You need to be folding the turn if you've called the flop here. Your hand, by the way, is sort of indifferent. The solver doesn't actually check call the flop with too many ace king combos here. When it does, it actually thinks it's a fold. I decided to call based on the read that the players who bluff overbluff in this spot. I would say if you're in a more passive pool, you're playing 25 an L or something, there's going to be less players like that, and you do just want to fold the turn here. River was ace of clubs, we check, and our opponent decides to give up here with their hand, which was the queen jack of spades. That doesn't actually bet turn because it doesn't have blockers to jack 10 of spades, but you know, these are humans, we're not playing perfect GTO. You can see with queen jack of hearts, it's just an optional bluff on the river here, so they can go for that or not. On this ace, they're going to be very polar. They're just going to have 10x and they're going to have bluffs basically. If we rewind a little bit and we look at how their hand is meant to actually play on the turn, you can see that it is meant to mostly check, and it's this kind of hand and also just random overcards that I expect to aggress too much. And the reason I expect the more mass data based reg, the aggro reg, to aggress too much here is that this is probably going to be a really overfolded spot from big blind's point of view. And the reason for that is not that people are meant to call ace king and don't, it's that they're meant to slow play the flop with with queens, are meant to get here with queens, are meant to get here with jacks at some frequency, and then of course not fold. And then they're meant to do a bunch of jamming on the turn. They're meant to slow play a 10 with a check call line on the flop and then jam the turn. And most crucially, they shouldn't land here with loads of hands like ace king. But if you ask me, what does the average 100 NL reg land with on the turn when they check call the flop here, it probably is going to be ace king. So I think most people in my shoes fold ace king and they get here with far too much of it, and that's why data's going to say it's good to barrel turn here from Villain's point of view, and that's why aggro regs that are using a data strategy are going to bluff this turn with almost anything. So when you have that read, you don't want to fold ace king anymore. When you don't have that read, you just fold the ace king. It's such a night and day spot depending on who your opponent is. The pool can be very polarized. Take notes, pay attention, scour the lobby, look at VPEP over decent samples, have a look at who's 3-betting 12% rather than 8%. That can be a big tell. What's 4-bet aces? Wow. That is quite the gift. Pocket fives, we can call, we can fold, we can 3-bet. I'm going to 3-bet. My opponent has the pink tag, which means at some point they were playing one table. I do double check sometimes to see if that's still the case. They are playing one table still, so pink tag is accurate. It's not always going to be the case. Interesting flop spot. My toolkit here is B100 check. Against the recreational, I'm not opposed to using a small bet sometimes, but I think just going with check call here is fine. The reason I'm going to check call against most sizes here is that it's extremely common for recreationals to flat far too many hands to 3-bets and then just be egregiously overbluffing. So this is a very overbluff node. Now that they've checked flop, they have very, very few value hands. Recreationals are very bad at protecting a checking range here and not trying to protect their equity when they have a pair. So check call, turn and river on any run out here is going to be incredibly winning, and that is the play I'm going to take. What to do on river? I mean, my opponent usually has no pair. How often are they going to raise me if I go B10? B10 is interesting. You could get greedier here and go B33. I might do something in between, like a kind of B20 type thing and call a raise. I just think my opponent's landing incredibly weak here, and the B10 just might not make enough from hands like ace queen. I want to leave both doors open exploitatively there. I want to get the crying call from king queen or ace jack or ace queen, and equally I want to leave the door open for like a random spew raise. I don't think it's a spot I'll get spew raised that much though, so maybe just going on the bigger side like B33 is better there. So this sounds interesting. We've check called flop, big blind against under the gun, range bet like sizing, face over bet on this node, which is a bit intimidating. The ace turn is very uncapping to us. We make a lot of 2-pair on this turn. We should have a few slow plays from flop here, although not many. Ace 10 I think is just a bit too good to fold with the redraw and excellent blockers and newly turned top pair. Interesting one. The first thing I want to look at in this fives hand is just the optionality of this 3-bet. You can go either way. So then why did I choose to 3-bet here? Well, the intention is just to isolate a weaker player, build a pot against a weaker player, then look to have a skill edge post flop. You could argue that they underfold to 3-bets in these positions, and I think that's probably true, but fives is not a hand that it does benefit a lot from fold equity. It loves fold equity, but skill edge post flop can compensate for a lack of fold equity pre-flop. The other alternative is just to call, and then a reg in the big blind is going to be extremely squeeze happy in a spot where a recreational is open. We've called an extremely capped range, and I think it's just better to be the one playing heads up against the fish here almost all the time by 3-betting, which is why I embarked on that line. So the solver's first choice of sizing on this board is actually a slight overbet. I said I was playing pot check here generally, which I really like. This is the typical board, the epitome of a low flop where it is good to use the really big sizes as the 3-better, and I'm making some content at the moment where we're actually encouraging that in both single raise pots and 3-bet pots. So we go for check here with fives when we're playing the strategy. That's always going to be what we want to do. And villain is meant to get fairly stab happy here. They're meant to be betting with a lot of different hands, but they check back. And then we have to ask, what does it look like when they check back in real life? Well, how often do they actually check nines here? How often do they actually check 9-8 here? Ace-8, things like that. Almost never. How often did they check ace-queen? Probably always. King-queen could well be always if they're just a passive recreational. So you want to 3-bet the spot pre because you just want to get into a node where your opponent's playing transparently and badly and you just want to exploit them. So they check back on the flop here and we get this turn card of the 7 of hearts and we decide to give them a bit more rope because in this spot, if you're playing a big bet strategy like this, of course, you never bet fives. You could just bet really small here. The more passive the recreational player is, the more I would lean towards that, just betting like third pot now and saying your range is incredibly weak. Please call me with ace high. I'm going to protect my equity. I don't think I'm making anything from you. Bluffing. It's a bit of a trade-off. I decided to check again here with the intention that if they bet turn and river, they are going to be over bluffing to such a gigantic extent that I'm happy to risk giving the free card. And this is always the trade-off in these spots where you land with a ton of equity where you think your opponent's really capped. If you bet you're over bluffing crazily line and check to them, or do you go for the you're going to have to fold all the time, I'm just going to deny equity and get you to sometimes call with worse? And it depends on the passivity of the player, basically. We check, villain checks back. When they've checked twice, I think the likelihood of the recreational to bluff now is diminished. If they do bet river, they're still going to be way over bluffing, but I do think it's going to go check at a really high frequency now. That's not a contradiction. The thing is they have no value hands in their range in a spot like this. And so on the river card, which was the hyper blank 7 of clubs, which just enhances the status quo from the turn, we decide to bet with fives here. Now the hand is getting close to being able to block in theory, but remember in theory, villain is always going to put some stronger hands in their checking range, and that's going to stop us from just value betting small with impunity here. If we bet small, they're supposed to call, well, mixed call with ace-x. I think in reality, villain will just call more than this with ace-high, and they're supposed to have got here with nines, or 9-8, or something like that, or sixes at some frequency. I think even sixes is going to struggle to check back turn. A lot of recreationals are going to say, oh, you just have 2 big cards now, you check twice, I have the best hand, I bet my sixes. So definitely a big fan of the block bet on this river spot here. I think it's right. So in this hand, their opponent bet third pot on the flop. Generally, that means to me that they're range betting. They might not be, but most people are. And so the GTO bet frequency here for third pot was like 50 something percent. If most regs who bet third pot are range betting, you could say pool's average bet frequency is like in the 80s here. So I think this is a better model for what they're doing than the GTO solution was. And against this, you have to bear in mind that you're on a board where they're not actually supposed to do that, right? And therefore, given the amount of nutted stuff you actually have here, you can play a ton of raise, like an absolute shed load of raise in this situation. Even the hand we had here, ace 10, is raising at a really high clip, and the showdown value of ace-x against an earlier position open is just going to be lower. Your opponent's range betting, they're merging out their range, you're just incentivized to attack a lot here. So definitely raising flop sometimes, calling flop sometimes. As played, we decided to call. You could maybe err on the side of raising, by the way, here as an exploit against the pool that's getting a bit unruly with their range bets on boards where they just shouldn't really do that. Turn was the ace of spades, and villain goes for the overbet strategy here. So let's just take a look at what the solver thinks of that. Ace of spades, so we're going to start with check. Solver is using, okay, b7a5, b66 type sizing. That makes sense to me. On this board, I noted in game that I just make a lot of 2-pair. I'm kind of uncapped here, and this sizing makes more sense to me than the overbet. If I do give it an overbet as well, I don't think it's going to be like a blunder or anything by any means. Villain uses this smaller overbet here. I think this is going to be fine, and yeah, I mean, it's just not really wanting to use it at all. So in order to actually review that, you're going to have to take out the smaller sizing and force it to use that sizing. So yeah, I thought that was a little bit offbeat, a bit weird to use it on that card. It's maybe not horrible or anything, but the more polarizing the turn is for your opponents, of course, the less good the overbet strategy is going to be. The archetypal spot where you want to use the big overbet is going to be just a brick turn that fully preserves a nut advantage. And on this board, you don't even have a huge nut advantage to start with on flop that grows when big blind doesn't raise you on flop, but you're still going to be a bit constrained on turn by that flop texture and certainly by this turn card. So villain goes for the overbet. Fine, we have the pair plus redraw hand, ace 10. I'd imagine this is just a pure call here. There's nothing fancy going on. So we do call with that, and the river brings the 7 of diamonds. Villain gives up with just a random king queen combo here. So interesting to note like what the bluffing range should look like. When you overbet turn and you get a brick river, you should be giving up the majority of the hands you bluffed with on turn, but there will be a subcluster of hands that have good blockers that are generating a bit of EV by bluffing. And in this spot, generally looking at things like these low cards down here that are unblocking the pair plus draw range, unblocking the folding range. Looks like King Queen is absolutely right to give up with overall. You can just see that's blocking like a lot of hands that call turn fold river. It would be a lot better to have a blocker to a 7 by having a low card here. This river is quite a stark river, right? Like trip 7 gets there, so blocking the kickers of that is going to be more normal, and also not having that bigger card, call that a dangler in the Carrot Poker School, that blocks the range that calls turn folds river. So hopefully that's been an instructive one. All right, guys, let me know what you think about this format. I can make more sit-in, sit-out videos like this. I think it's a really good example of how you should be using some of your poker study time. I would definitely try to build this kind of exercise into your regime. It just keeps you accountable. It bridges the gap a bit between in-game and out-of-game. If you like the way I think and talk about the game, check out carrotcorner.com and use code EMBARK25 to embark on your formal poker education there to save 25% on all of our courses and bundles. We'll be back with more content very soon. Bye for now.